Hello, everybody. I'm Patrick Parker. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Empower ID. I worked on the product team and the product research team. We're here to talk about the yin and yang of zero trust policy-based administration, and I'll explain what that word salad means in a moment. So the spark for this talk, the inspiration, came from an interesting source this time. I saw interest, I think Ian, and some of the participants are in the audience here. I saw Ian post an article that he pulled something from his Wayback Machine. I think it was from back in 2010, where he'd written something where he was promoting to satisfy the auditors that using negative authorization or denying access in your access policies to make the auditors happy, to eliminate some of the risks. And then that immediately, Andre, who's in the audience here somewhere, there he is, right there. He jumped on it almost immediately, and he said he wished he'd never seen this posting completely against negative authorizations, that you really only do negative authorizations if you don't fully understand how authorizations and identity governance works. Pretty strong, but it was good. It got the argument started. And then some other people weighed in. Kevin, I don't know if Kevin's here. Kevin was originally at Burton, later at Gartner. He got in the mix. So it was a lively discussion, very interesting. So there was definitely an interest. And for someone who loves authorization, it was nice to see, because for a long time at the conferences, almost all the discussion was on authentication. Everything's about authentication, multi-factor authentication, and it feels like now, looking at where the funding's going in companies, where the discussions are online, some of the innovation. I saw Jerry out here somewhere. There's Jerry back there. Hey, Jerry. Some of the innovation is happening, that now there's an emphasis on, okay, maybe we have the authentication silos not solved, but at least, where we can workable. And multi-factor authentication, we have some good standards and building blocks there. Let's move on to the uncharted next frontier, which are, how do we deal with authorization? All these different silos that have completely distinct authorization models. There's no compatibility, translation layer, no centralized reporting that makes sense of it all across systems, so you can have nice policy-based that are applied across systems, and an understanding of access risks and the meaning of the access across systems. So the discussion's definitely going now. Seems to be getting some funding, seems to be getting some interest, so that's very heartening to see. We have a lot of new tools. Since authorization is now becoming a hot topic, we have new tools or new frameworks like Zero Trust, which has a very large emphasis on least privilege, granting only the required access for an authorized purpose for the least amount of time is a key component of Zero Trust. We have that in the mix now as something that's been broadly accepted. Zero Trust is a good model for securing organization. And then, as we mentioned in the beginning, policy-based access. Andre went very deep in his discussion of policy-based access and why well-crafted policy-based access, if it with an implicit denial unless a policy is created in a least privileged zero trust model, it has no need for negative authorizations, that they only add complexity. And what are negative authorizations? Well, negative authorizations are, blanket rules, like if you're not above this height, you're not allowed to ride the ride, or you will never have that access under any circumstances. So that's negative authorization. And they have a lot of downsides. They're a reactive approach. They're a big hammer. They're not very, they're always going to deny no matter what. They can make a mess of trying to figure out the resultant access that people have, which are some of the arguments that were made. And they can lead to a lot of complexity, which equals cost. And complexity in security can lead to risk and vulnerability. But because they're just very simplistic and really easy to understand, they're not going anywhere. Google, I think this was 2022, introduced denial policies, because the allure of a denial policy is that I say, you will never be able to do that. I can go to bed at night and not have to worry that you're going to be doing that, because it's a denial. It's just very simplistic. It's easy to understand. Seems like something that is enticing, even given the downsides. Now, risk management, on the other hand, kind of the sister of denial, a little more sophisticated. Maybe negative authorizations is the country cousin of the sophisticated city cousin, which is risk management. Risk management is based on a concept of what can you do with this access? How risky is it if you would be able to create a purchase order? How risky is it if you're able to, and then which data you can access, accessing this customer data versus this, just documentation. It also focuses on threats and their impact. So there's a measure of how bad is this risk, and you're thinking through, if it happened, how bad would it be? What would be the impact of that risk? They're completely independent of access policies, access grants, and your risk policies typically are intermingled in your access policies, so it keeps it simple. And they can prevent risky access, so prevent it from being granted, and they can deny it. They can detect it as well. And one thing about risk policies, which we'll talk about, is that you can choose. With a negative authorization, there's no wiggle room. You can choose with a risk policy to allow it, even though you know it's a risk. You can just accept and mitigate the risk. So I used ChatGPT, and I fed in as context all the discussion comments plus Ian's article, and I had it generate a debate. So we have robots debating each other, taking your position, taking his position, and arguing it. So on the pro side, so I'll be the pro robot, basically, negative authorizations give you an extra layer of protection that no matter what you have in an access policy, you know that certain things aren't going to happen. And I'll be the negative debater. I'll be the other robot. That they can lead to complexity, they're unmanageable, they create chaos, it makes it hard to tell what's going on. And if you have a well-crafted policy, PBAC policy, with zero trust or negative deny by default, then you don't even need it. But then you don't have a fail-safe. You still need a fail-safe, and you need multiple layers of protection. If you just have your access policies, then you're betting the farm on everything being handled by these access policies. Well, and automation's not going to eliminate that. So completely, you can't eliminate this complexity by automation. I don't even want to hear that. So positive authorization, strict adherence to zero trust or deny by default will give you a high level of security without resorting to negative authorization. So we'll leave it that they didn't really come to an agreement. But I'm not here to settle this debate at all, maybe to more inflame it, keep it going. But really, in my opinion, the access, the positive, the yang, the light, is the yang granting the access, that really it is interdependent and requires the yin. That you need the either negative authorizations or risk management as an even better alternative, which you did not argue against. That you need them to balance each other, to create harmony. You need both. They both need each other. You really can't just have one without the other and have harmonious balance. And the reason for that is that you have to think about, in my opinion, the practicalities of crafting these PBAC authorization policies where it's denied by default. Unless I grant the access in a policy, I don't have to worry about somebody having it. Then you think about PBAC, everybody wants to think, well, we're pushing it down to the business. Business users know this information. Business users, that's the mantra everybody says in marketing, which never happens, that business users are going to craft these policies. Well, then if you start distributing it out, then you have everybody who has a different level of skill set and different level of knowledge of the other policies. So unless, you can see all the possibilities in your head of all the PBAC policies and all the things that aren't supposed to happen and all the things that have been authorized, then you really can't feel safe that you are preventing the risky things from happening without any type of protection. You're basically jumping out of an airplane, in my opinion, without a parachute. And risk policies add on that nice extra layer that, some risks are maybe acceptable for your company. In a big company, you'd never let this person perform this action, like creating a purchase order and approving a purchase order. But maybe in a small company that you have to wear multiple hats, practicality, you want to know it's a risk, you want to mitigate it and accept it, say we're going to watch what that person does, but you have to allow it. You can't just have a blanket denial. So risk policies give you a maybe. So now maybe we can have these P-back policies with a risk policy, and then we'll achieve this harmonious world where all of our applications, application authorization nirvana, and everything's working out great. Sounds great, right? Well, I hate to be the party pooper. I'm going to bust your bubble. But unfortunately, reality is too messy. We're all dealing with lots of applications, legacy. We don't have every application. Oh, you have a PBAC, so you have a PDP, you have a policy decision point where I can plug in and get real-time authorization decisions. Great, that's great. It's out there, it's ready. They're waiting. We got it up. We're going to launch it. Every application owner, point your application at it, right? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait, what? You can't call it? You can't call it? Nobody's going to call it unless it's a custom app. Nobody supports external authorization decisions at runtime. Well, we built this beautiful thing. We have this yin-yang harmony here. What's going on? It's going to sit here? So that's reality, is that unless you're building an app or you have an app that's already plugged into where it's going to call some external authorization source, your PDP is going to be sitting there waiting by the phone, hoping somebody's going to call it, and it's not going to get called. So what do? We know we need policies. We know we have a terrible problem on our hand that, Gartner keeps blaming us, that we are the problem. And maybe they're right, with preventable misconfigurations, 99%, that's pretty harsh. We know we need to do something. So thankfully, Martin's shining the light. Well, policies and automation, that's the key, right? Well, policy and automation, how are we going to do it? Well, we can pull out grandpa's tools. If you mention the word GRC, risk, people think, ERP systems, SAP, they think something like that's not really cool at all. Those are grandpa's technologies. You're not going to get any young people on board recruiting them to work on GRC. It sounds old, it sounds terrible, sounds clunky, but there's an answer. People invented it. IT is a little bit more marketing than you think. So what could we call it that would make it cool for the kiddies and their Kubernetes and their cloud worlds and APIs? Oh, wait a minute. Let's call it guardrails. Guardrails. Everybody loves to say guardrails. Guardrails. I feel like I'm in Tron. Got the guardrails keeping me in here. So, and the guardrails are everywhere. Guardrails. Everybody, if you haven't written the paper on guardrails, you better pop a paper out soon. And it says the way to get your name out there is write something about guardrails. Everything's a guardrail. We're putting guardrails on our cloud configurations. We're putting guardrails on everything. Well, if you look at it, risk management GRC, those are guardrails. So don't call it grandpa's tool anymore. Say we're going to do risk guardrails, fine-grained authorization guardrails. So now it's cool. Everybody wants to get involved in guardrails. Sounds sexy, right? Yeah, love it. What other cool term can we put in there? And this one's for a very practical purpose. But if we plug our P back in, we have our guardrails now, we still have the problem that we author our policies here in time, this time, and then the user is performing the action here, and we don't have a real-time call-out for authorization. So you're authoring the policy here, and then typically, right then, a provisioning engine is granting that access, coarse-grained, not fine-grained, no context, because how could it have context? It's like 6 months before you're going to try to do the thing. There's no context about your IP subnet or that. So what if we pull out something else that might change it, and we say, okay, if we author the policies here, but we don't provision the access until as close as possible to when you need to use the access. And maybe not all access, just risky access. So you author the policy, and then only just in time, maybe upon request, role activation, elevation as they call it in PAM, you elevate. And if you elevate, you could close that time window to where maybe it's even elevating for a day, or maybe even for the length of a session. Then you have context. Then you know, where are you? What's your IP subnet? Did you do MFA? You know, all kinds of cool stuff. So now you can plug in your cool PBAC policy where you don't grant the access or provision it unless you meet all the criteria of this very fancy PBAC policy, which also has guardrails. So there you go. So now, plugging that all in, and I think I was one slide ahead because of this. This is my shift. You shift just in time. So you author the policies here. You don't provision risky access. You provision it just in time. And now you've given the opportunity that you're more closer to having context and having somewhat might approximate real-time external authorization, even though it isn't. And you can check MFA, you can do all kinds of cool stuff because you're closer to the point in time where they're going to use the access, and you can have more contextual information. You can do some other things with it. And that's it.
So I heard you talk about PDPs, policy decision points. Then there are policy administration points and a lot more.
Yep.
But I think if I hijack these, I think that could be a very nice attack vector. If I hijack your policies and I'm able to change them, gone with your security.
If you get my policies,
I think you need some governance on that also.
You'd have to hack the enforcement point. Because if the enforcement point is just, if you get my policies, then you just basically know my rule book, but that doesn't get you. You'd have to insert yourself somehow into the enforcement of those policies early. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the attack vector I was meaning, but
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. It's very interesting. I'm really curious to see how this all develops. So thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.